Welcome to Preventing Brandslaughter, your go-to show for discovering authentic, leading-edge ways to drive employee retention, elevate customer experience, and dominate marketing and sales targets without unknowingly killing your own brand. Tune in to lighthearted, transparent conversations featuring today's leading industry experts and entrepreneurs, breaking down stories of screw-ups, successes, and nuggets of wisdom every business owner or leader should know at heart. Let's get this show started with your hosts, Eric Sims and John Giuliano.
Hey, welcome to the show. It's another episode of Preventing Brandslaughter, and we're very excited today to have Victoria Pelletier on the call and on with us, and John's here with us too. So, first off, we just want to kind of jump in and learn more about you, Victoria, more about who you are. Obviously, I just read your bio in an intro, but I think it's always more interesting for people to hear firsthand, who you are, what you're about, and give us a little background on yourself.
Sure, happy to. Well, thanks for having me here. I'm happy to be chatting with you both today. I use a word that people often ask me to explain to them in describing me, and that is a multi-potentialite. And I use that because it actually means I have a ton of different passions and interests, and you will see that as it relates to what I do for work, for money, but also what I do for fun and passion and the kind of impact I want to have. So I'm a career-long corporate executive. I got promoted to a C-suite role in my early 20s as a brand new mother, big stretch role for me, and have stayed predominantly operating at that level, running markets or business units, predominantly for Fortune 500 companies, but I have also built and bought businesses. So strong entrepreneurial, blood runs through me as well. I'm not only within the big corporates, but in the work that I do sort of on the side as a side hustle. I sit on a number of boards, both not-for-profits and for-profit boards. And I'm a professional public speaker. I've been speaking for 20 years, initially just purely for business purposes at conferences. And then it switched maybe 10 years ago to do that professionally as well, where I get paid to do those. And then there's this intersection between, what I do for work, but also the things I'm passionate about around leadership and culture and diversity and inclusion. And then I'm a mom, a wife, a mother. I was joking with John before we got started. I'm a hockey player. You'll hear a tiny bit of an accent. I'm originally from Canada, and just keep getting further south from Toronto to New York to now in South Florida.
Wow. Okay. That's like a whole bunch. It's just amazing. She can jam that all in I don't know what, the first minute and a half of the show. Right. So that's amazing. First off, that's just such a mountain of work and stuff that you do on a regular basis. Is there any pecking order in that stuff? Do you find yourself with any of that feeling or in that, maybe there's a natural gravitation towards some of it more than others, and then more of others to be a necessity of higher priority? I know as a parent, that sometimes that comes before other stuff, even when we have other stuff we'd prefer to be doing in the moment. But where do you see yourself today versus in the past, maybe spending a bulk of your time?
I made a choice to have my children quite young. And so I just became an empty nester. My younger one, who graduated high school last year, is taking a gap year and decided to move with my older son. So the two of them are out of the house now. So that, doesn't fill up as much of my time. They still need me in a very different way, although they're on the payroll. So that's the kind of need that they need me a little bit more sometimes. But the majority of my time is the corporate day job, if you will. And I often get asked whether I would want to shift and just do my public speaking. And I do very, very minute amount of coaching, almost by referral only. But those are the things that I talk a lot about, the things that bring me joy. Mm-hmm. And if those became my full-time job, I don't think I would want to do, or I wouldn't enjoy it quite as much.
Right.
So I love, the complexity of working for these large companies, running large business units. And I've been predominantly business to business, and that in itself creates complexity in that you've got multiple constituents you serve, not only the shareholders of the companies you work for, but just the clients that, write the check to your company. And then whether you're supporting their employees, their customers. So that I like kind of big, hairy, meaty problems. And I get that in my day job. So that's where the majority of my time gets spent. And then all of the other just, fills in. And I have a saying that where there's conviction, there's capacity. So I make time for what I want to do. Certainly the corporate day job pays the bills and is where I spend a majority of the time.
Yeah. John and I think relate very heavily to your approach of like, or at least your enjoyment, of what you do go for. Like, I consider myself quite the variety junkie, right? Like, that was the reason I got out of corporate America originally, was it ate up so much of my time. And I'm still I guess you'd say I'm in corporate America anyway, because John and I serve in the company we own. But it was, I want more variety. And we got into outsourcing because that was why I stayed in it. I was like, I didn't know anything about call centers and stuff. But what I loved about the aspect of the industry was, like, I wasn't working in one business. We were working with 10, 15, 20 large companies at a time. And then being able to work with them in so many different capacities. And I love learning about companies and people too. So I think I get that vibe from you as well. So I think that's just amazing that you've been able to position yourself in life to be able to do that. And I think I can relate to having family members on payroll too. I have a daughter that's in college. I think she was communicating with you before this, like Peyton. So tell us a little bit about what you're doing right now. Like, I know you're in corporate America, but could you share a little bit about what, majority of your time is and what you're working on or passionate about in the moment?
Yeah, well, I'm just about to start a transition, but I can tell you what I've been working on these last couple of years. I've been working for Accenture, so large consulting, technology, and outsourcing company.
Okay.
Initially recruited to be a part of their CEO and board transformation practice. So working with CEOs and their direct reports and board members on what I'd call is really the intersection of transformation, whether that's an acquisition, it could be a digital transformation, a reorganization, but the intersection with their own personal leadership and culture as an outcome of all the things that they need to be practicing. I was recruited for that, but there's a few industries I know fairly well. One is financial services, the other is travel. Spent a decade running corporate travel businesses. So I currently lead their their travel and hospitality portfolio across North America. I will be transitioning out. I just have this week left. And then I'm going to go back to a smaller organization. Ideally, there's a few opportunities that I'm exploring. Haven't yet either progressed them far enough to make a decision. And some new ones have just popped up, and we'll see. For me, I like taking usually distressed businesses or markets and turning them around. Yeah. I've been a part of 18 mergers and acquisitions in my career. And so I do a lot of work around transformation and synergies and reorganization. And like you both in the world of outsourcing, that's actually where my career started when I got recruited out of my first company out of college, where I became the COO for an outsourcing contact center company. So
do you know our pain?
Yeah. I know it deeply, deeply. I do.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
So, Victoria, when you're stepping in and doing these, I guess you could say transformations, going through the M&A process, you're helping transition one team in, one team out. As you mentioned, you had 18 over the course of your career. What are some of those common trends that you're seeing within organizations that are like table stake level one errors that can be easily fixed, but for whatever reason they were not, that if they would have just made those changes, it may have just changed the outcome of or trajectory of their company?
A few of them. So one is actually around the change management approach itself. I find far too many companies who have project management teams internally, and they think that they can handle it. Hey, I've got a project management office, a PMO office, and we can do it. But this is substantially different. And a lot of it has to do with people and the, challenge in getting people on board through the change and the communication that's required. And so that's one. So typically, actually, before Accenture, I worked for IBM and doing large scale transformations. I remember saying to one of our leaders, if we're not personally helping handle the change management, then we need to increase our sort of contingency in terms of how much it's going to cost or the service level agreements we're going to commit to, because so much of it's out of our hands. So I think, the change management piece is a significant piece of that. And the other is around the communication related to change management, but those at the top leading it need to be in front around why we've made the decisions we've made. And so, let's not kid ourselves. There's an expectation that there's going to be synergy in bringing companies together, and therefore people, processes, and technology are going to change. Let's be transparent about that upfront. What we can share, let's share that so people feel confident and trust in our ability. And what we don't know, let's also go, put our hand up and say, I don't know what I don't know, but I want to bring you on the bus to help us on that journey and let us learn from you, particularly when you're the company being acquired, to get them, on board with that.
Yeah, no, that's great. From my experience, at least, I've seen a lot of the kind of that laissez-faire leadership style within, call it the mid-level, the Fortune 5 enterprise companies, where they've kind of reached that arrival period where they've hit the apex of where their business is and disconnected and put some leaders in place that may not have been the right fit and didn't really articulate the why or the vision of the organization, and they leave it to the team to create that vision. And most of the time, it doesn't really align with the core values of the company, which creates, turmoil and all kinds of issues within the organization. So yeah, I completely agree with that.
Go ahead, John.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say with what you're doing with these companies in the last couple of years, one of the things that pops to my mind is just the impacts of COVID and virtualization and pivoting, along with the struggle. I'm thinking diversity, culture, that kind of talk, but along with the struggle that a lot of organizations have around Gen Z and millennial type of retention as well. Like those are monstrous challenges that a lot of companies are struggling with. Have you, what's been your experience with that? Like, what have you seen, and what are your thoughts on it?
Yeah, I am. Prior to coming to Accenture, I actually, for IBM, I ran the client-facing business in the Americas that was related to, the function of HR and workforce and the way companies needed to look at their talent. And so I spent a lot of time, particularly with CHROs, the heads of HR or the people function, talking about what this looked like. And so it was a combination of, yes, when COVID hit, like, what does remote working look like? How do we keep our employees engaged? And then now that's just, that is this hybrid way of working is going to continue. But it's finding that optimal mix. So they're still trying to figure that out, quite frankly. But then the other piece that I saw the shift in was around less of a focus on job titles and functions broadly and looking more discreetly at skills, because every company, whether you're in technology formally or not, is a technology company. In the technology we need to enable our employees to deliver to our customers, and there's an expectation, and COVID exacerbated that for this consumer grade experience that we all want to be able to, the Amazon experience that we all, used heavily, during that time frame. So everyone's needing to transform. And so we have to look at skills much more discreetly and do this analysis of what do we have today? What skills do we have to meet the demands and meet our strategy for delivery now? And then marry it with our 3 and 5 year strategic plans in terms of growth of products or services, market share, and figure out what skill do we need for the future. And then you actually have to build a strategy over how you're going to build a bridge to that, right? Some of that's going to come through automation, right? So we're going to, some of that's going to come through outsourcing, but are you going to build the talent? And then you need to start, as you talk about generationally, who's got the propensity to learn? And therefore, let's invest in growing it from within and not lose the institutional knowledge versus just having to go and buy it. So those are where I find a lot of leaders are looking at right now.
Yep. Okay. That's, we see that quite a bit too. And the impacts when we look at, quote, brand slaughter, I think one of the challenges that the executives that we come in contact with and the leadership teams that we come in contact with is they may not connect the dot that for talent selection or talent placement, right? Like you may pick a great person, but they may not be the right person for that position based on skills. Because to your point, we did see that big time. That jumped way up because, again, I went from being able to get away with a lot of inadequacies in my position if I was in person or managing a department in person or where it may be, to all of a sudden my technical skills went up dramatically, right? I had to be far more analytical in my approach to the business, had to be far more technically sound to manage the business. So, but we've seen that as a disconnect, and how much of the conversation that you've had with them around that and with other people that, maybe you're working with around, hey, this is really a form of what can kill the brand. It's, most people think of like brand slaughter is like, hey, I put an ad out that we shouldn't have, right? Like that's really not it. That's not what we talk about. It's really a lot of this stuff where you're well intended, but without looking and adjusting and evolving, or bringing somebody in like you who says, hey, listen, I'm going to look at this from through a different lens and give you good feedback on how you should position things. You're going to end up doing something that you feel really good about, that's just going to tear down your business internally and therefore externally.
Yeah, so I see that a lot, and but I think it's because there tends to be this a myopic focus on certain things, and so in this case, if they are focused on skill, that's great. But what I refer a lot to sort of this responsible level of leadership, which is looking at multifaceted areas of leadership in the business. And so there's some data that I've seen and research over the last number of years, where when you look at the various stakeholders in the business, and usually, so shareholders and let's just say executives, it's so heavily skewed towards technology and towards skills that they miss on the other dimensions that are very important to their employees. And so in this case, things like, the mission and impact of the organization, or looking at the purpose, and how do you connect purpose of the organization to the purpose of the individual and the work they do. And it's very different actually generationally. So you look at the newer generation of workers, and if you were to map out sort of these, skill levels, again, it's heavily skewed. And I just sort of this vision that I have, this pictorial where tech's at the bottom. And so from an executive standpoint, they're focused there, but then you see the skew off to the right, which is where employees tend to want to see, and particularly the newer level of employees. That's where I see a lot of the brand slaughter happening, where there's a finite focus or myopic focus on skills and bringing that in without making sure it's connected to the organizational purpose, vision, mission, and the impact that the individual can have.
Yeah. Go ahead, John.
No, I totally agree. I think too many companies will hire for the skill and they miss on the core value and the why behind the vision of the company to align with that individual before they come into the organization. They can have all the talent in the world and be able to execute excellently, but if their mindset and their attitude and their why as an individual doesn't align with the why of the company, it's not going to work out. So, kind of leading into that, have you seen, and I've seen it personally, but have you seen a shift, I would say, in the last, let's call it 5 years, where that's more of a central focus for employees to be more bought into the vision of the organization rather than being bought into the role, or to a smaller degree, the compensation of the role that they're coming into?
Absolutely. And so I've seen, even in the work that I've been doing, companies who are actually going through an exercise to more clearly articulate the purpose, the stated purpose, and so that everyone then is on the same page, particularly for like some of these larger companies that have multiple companies in their portfolio, to make sure there's some commonality across it. But also because then it connects down to even for the consumer. So I see this whole, macro starts at the top around it, and connected to employees, but also ultimately should be connected to the customers and why they're buying. And COVID is one of the things that I think accelerated a lot of this work. We were seeing it before, but seeing it much more now as we're stuck in our homes working over for a number of years, and there was no separation. That became just so much more important for employees to work for companies that they felt alignment with and buy from companies as well. But at the same time, there's this, and as leaders, our role is recognizing there's still a bit of a paradox for some people. So we'll buy gourmet dog food for our dogs, yet we'll still go to McDonald's for ourselves, right? So just recognizing that the paradox is still going to exist.
Yep. That's we were just talking about that one at home the other day. We're like, hey, the kids are wanting to eat garbage and the dogs are eating better than they are. So we try not to buy them that stuff. I do want to dive into a few other parts of your world that I think are really, really cool. As I mentioned, you're an author, you're a keynote speaker, you're a corporate leader. One of the things that popped off when I saw some information on you was the information about wife, mom, corporate executive. I'm assuming that may be in a specific order for a reason, maybe not. But I'm a father of 3 girls. I have 1 boy, 3 girls, and so I'm always looking at women who are extremely successful women who have a voice, and they're carrying a message to other young women and maybe even older women, and they're out there, just women in general, of what they can be and what they can do. And I picked up on some of that with you, that's part of, I feel like that's part of your mission too, is to say, kind of wave that flag and say, look at what you can accomplish, if you put your passion to work and things like that. So can you share a little bit about that part of your heart and that part of your work?
Yeah, I have two hashtags that I sign a lot of my social media posts off with. The first is unstoppable, because that is totally my mantra. It happens to be the title of a book that I co-authored, but it's just really how I live. And the other is no excuses, which drives my children insane. But really, that is how I lead my life. And it actually comes, so if you want to understand my why, and where my drive comes from, I have like extremely difficult early beginnings. I'm born to a drug addicted teenage mother who beat me. I was fortunate. I was removed from her care, and I was adopted into, a loving family. Although my parents that adopted me were lower socioeconomically. My dad was a janitor, mom was secretary. And so my mom said to me, and my mom was the one that raised me. And so my mom said to me at one point, Tori, you need to do better than us. And she meant vocationally, make sure I got that education. And she didn't have to tell me that, because I was determined to be better than the biology or the circumstance. Right. So that's my why. And as a result of that, and the lower socioeconomic status, I started working at age 11. I worked in a hair salon. At 14, I was the assistant manager in the shoe store that I worked at. Worked all throughout university. And that's in part why at 24, I got recruited out of the banking environment I worked at, contact centers, running large operations in that environment, to be the COO of a BPO company, an outsourcing organization. And my why, I tell people now, it's actually a big part of what changed my my speaking from being pure conference-based, business-based, to much more open and doing it and sharing my story, in terms of that's what drove me. I was not going to let anything hold me back, nor anyone tell me no. And so I share that, but I also talk about the lessons I had to learn along the way. Like, I made some pretty big missteps and failure. And so a lot of what I speak to now is recognizing that you can have it all, not always at the same time. And there's compromises and trade-offs we make, particularly when we talk about being parents and what does that mean in that dynamic at home. And there's a lot of things that I wish my 20-something-year-old self knew. So I love to share that and help, and particularly women, because we're still 60 years away from having pay equity in North America. Only 53 of the Fortune 500 companies are female CEOs. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done. So to the extent that I can, as I've risen, I want to pull those with me as I rise.
That's awesome.
That's incredible.
The mess, and I know you do speaking with that, and some of the, and your book, I think your book is Unstoppable, or at least the book you contributed to, you're a contributing author to that book, and wrote a whole chapter about, I think it was some about your story, specifically around some of the stuff you overcame. And one, congratulations, because I think those are stories that, they're encouraging to us and others, like they're your why, but I think it's really awesome that you've been courageous enough to share that story along with it, because I think a lot of C-suite individuals have a tendency to shy away from potentially the darker sides of their upbringing or their own background. And although we all have them, right? I think it shows people they can still be real and transparent, and that, hey, you weren't just born as a CEO or a COO, right? You didn't have it just handed to you. Hey, I started here, and these are the things I did, and these are my whys as to I overcame those things. Where are you looking to take that up to the next level? Because I tie that into, in today's world, and I have conversations with my girls a lot about this. Today's world, because of social media and because everybody, at least if you engage in it, you're out there. So you immediately have a brand, whether you like it or not. There's a perception of you that is, and John and I say this all the time, marketing is what you say about yourself. Branding is what other people say about you when you're not around, right? And so what you're putting out there creates a brand. It may not be the brand you're intending. You may be creating Brandslaughter at an early age. So is there any of that you kind of, I won't use the word preach, but that you speak to, or that you have a philosophy on when you're looking at that and saying, hey, listen, there's a perception. If we're all honest, there's a perception of any type of person, right? and you've got to overcome sometimes those perceptions in corporate America have to be overcome, as to your point, where we're still battling that thing where there's equity. So how does that get built into your conversations and speaking?
Well, when I give talks about, my career journey, I will share my why. Like let's not be mistaken. I am driven because of what I've overcome, and that propels me to be a better version of myself all the time. But then I also talk about beyond that, there's things that I really attribute my career success to. And so certainly performing and improving my own skills is a big, element of that. The ability to create boundaries for myself is another. And that level of resilience that goes back to the early years. And then the fourth one I spent a lot of time talking about is personal brand. And I agree with you. Perception is reality. So what I coach people to is you do need to curate the message. You need to be incredibly consistent and relevant to the audience, connected back to the brand. And sometimes you have to pivot. And so in my case, because I was the only woman and the youngest executive by a couple of decades when I first moved into that exec role, I kind of showed up in a very, in a way at work that I thought I had to. Mm-hmm. There was zero vulnerability. I wasn't going to let you see that I was vulnerable, emotional, and I had any kind of baggage behind me. But unfortunately, I got a nickname as the Iron Maiden. So running contact centers, you need to, and outsourcing, you're not on your A game, you're not managing performance, you lose money. And so I could do that, and again, through some of these M&A, but when I learned that crushed me, because that's actually not who I am innately. The nickname is Turtle. I'm tough exterior, but all mushy on the inside. And so for me, I had to work really hard to change people's perception and therefore my brand. But it's been critically important and a big part of my success. I get, when recruiters reach out to me, a lot of the times they do it now because I am known to be that transformational leader who's almost maniacally focused on a kind of human-centered leadership that's, authentic and transparent without any trade-off for performance. And so my brand is what gets me roles or clients who want to work with me, or even potentially get me on stages so I can share this story with, the organizers of other events. So I don't think there's a time we should be waiting for. I told my son, who's my older one, just coming out of college, just turned 23, you have to be working on it now. Now he doesn't like LinkedIn. He thinks that's for old people. I'm like, dude, that's where everyone is. Let's with it. Right. So it's important. Start it now. You can pivot and change as you grow, or you make mistakes, but it's really important. Yeah.
I just had the same conversation with Peyton not too long ago. She's like, LinkedIn, that's all old business people or whatever. I'm like, yes, but it's unfortunately, whichever you look at it, that's where it's all happening. So you've got to participate, and then you've got to choose how you want to participate and how you want people to, show your expertise or show who you are. And I was like, it's an interesting juggling act of expressing who you are as a person and what you can do as a professional, right? And I was like, it's an interesting kind of look at doing that. I think one of the more powerful things that I think is great with your story and what you're doing is that when I hear you talking about what your whole life journey is, that you've leveraged, and you call it your why, which is there were some things that happened, but you've leveraged the skill set of overcoming and transforming your own life into helping other people and entities and businesses do the same. And I've always found the biomechanics of that are very similar. There's not a huge jump. I'm a recovering addict, and an alcoholic. And so, 15 years ago, I had to start life all over again and just say, fundamentally, how do I overcome this? And what are the best practices I need to put in place? And once I got myself right, I realized these principles that I've learned are actually principles I can apply in business and in management and in finances and everything else. So I think that's great. You're able to transition that. Is there any one thing that you would you always say, this is if I could only teach somebody one thing, if you gave me 1 minute, with somebody and I had to teach them one thing, what would that one thing be? What would that nugget of wisdom be?
Around being incredibly authentic. And that means many things though. So, and so that is sharing your lived experience to the extent that one's comfortable with. Not everyone needs to be as open, as you or I might be around that, but be really authentic. And that means on like, what are your desires? Like, where do you want to get to? So even from a career perspective, like having that open dialogue with others and putting it out there so that, hopefully they're going to help you with it, but then you can go after it too. For those who choose to be in leadership positions, that ability to be incredibly authentic. And that means being really transparent. It means being vulnerable. It's changed the followership I've had, and people who want to go through the proverbial fire with me as a result, and therefore we have business success together.
Yeah.
So that was something I was so afraid of, being authentic, being my real self, and letting people in and see the cracks and all. But it probably wasn't until my 30s that I started to do that much more so. And since then, like it's opened up the world to me. So that's a message I would be telling people as early as possible.
Authenticity. Yeah. And I get excited when I hear people say that, because like, I look at that and go like, that's no different for a business. Like, because people get behind, they connect to authenticity. So as an organization, if your leaders and the business itself can be authentic to who it is, then what we call brand devotees, right? They attach themselves to that because they connect with it in some way that's bigger than just a cheeseburger, or bigger than just a widget, or bigger than just a cup of coffee, or whatever it is, right? And so when you look at the work you've done, is there one project or one company or whatever it may be that you look at and you're like, this is the one that was like the coolest transition? Like, it was just one of those things that like, it was like picture perfect. Like, if I couldn't have dreamed it up any cooler than it went. And if so, can you share a little bit about it?
Picture perfect. I'm the type who likes to like break things to put them back together again. So.
Yeah. Well, and maybe that fits your model. Like when I say picture perfect, it's like ideal for like what you love to do, right? Like not perfect in the sense that it went perfect, but perfect in the sense that it's like, this was the model. If I could recreate this one 100 times and do it with different people, I would.
There was one organization, and I will protect the guilty and not to say who it is. One organization I worked for, I came in and I was told that I sort of broke the model. The challenge with a lot of these professional services organizations is the incentive model. It drives really crappy behavior, and therefore not a lot of teaming a lot of times.
Yeah.
And so I voice a lot around the need for us to marry our incentive models, going back to like purpose. And again, it doesn't mean you need to trade off for performance, but there was one where I went in and it was so broken. There was lots of different sort of service lines, like different parts of and different things that this one company sold, and trying to bring it all together. And we were representing a very large client portfolio that didn't buy in that way. And so what I did is I shifted the total model, and I said, look, I've got people from each of these lines. I'm going to align them the way our client is aligned, because that's the way they think, that's the way they will buy, and they'll build trusted relationships without just trying to sell whatever it is, their product or service line that they were selling. But it meant I needed to change, interestingly, the incentive and compensation models. So I, as a leader, would like move credit around to make sure that happened. Because I said, we win or we lose as a team, period. And I was really proud of that, because I had a team who was excited to be a part of, and it was actually a sort of a turnaround kind of portfolio. And so not everyone would have wanted to be a part of that, but given that we were looking to do things a little differently. And like I said, others around the organization, large companies said, it's sort of breaking the model and doing that. But for me, I was proud. We had great success and was able to, turn that around. I said that it was going to be an 18 to 24 month turnaround. And within about 15 months, we had done it.
Yeah.
That's something I'm proud of. And I will want to, recreate if I have the opportunity or the need to again in future.
Yeah. I think it's great because it's a challenge that we've come across with a number of people when you look at incentives. And we always joke, like a lot of people go into like what we call the crack incentives, where it's like, you give them a little sprinkle of something, it sparks some interest or activity momentarily, and then they crash, right? And it's not sustainable, one, and it's not really driving the behavior and connection that you're looking for, right? It's just you don't know what else to do a lot of times in those situations. Sometimes it is what it is. You got to do some stuff, but I think going back and aligning things like you're talking about, where you're saying like, let's look at the business, look at the customer, let's look at the employee, let's look at the business mission, let's look at all these things and align them up, because we know when things are aligned, they're going to work smoother, right? And people, it's going to be stickier. It's going to be a better situation for all involved, right? Because everyone's working within and communicating within that passionate lane of connectivity. So I think that's really cool that you've done that, because like I said, we've seen a lot of struggle with that out there. John, I know you've talked to, God, I don't know how many people about that topic in specific in the last year.
Yeah, personally, I've always been a fan of incentivizing the habit and not the outcome, because if you can get the habit instilled and it becomes concrete, the outcome will come, right? We also do things a little bit differently, and I'd like to say we broke the mold in terms of the outsourcing industry on how we incentivize. But again, this is level one stuff. We incentivize based on habit, and we also incentivize based on core values. So if a peer notices another peer living the core value, they can incentivize and provide that reward. So it's not just if my supervisor sees me do it, if my peer sees me do it, I can get rewarded as well. So you're creating that culture of, inclusive, working together. Everybody's kind of pulling their weight to move the ship forward.
Yeah.
I think that's something that most industries are missing the mark on. I think they're just very archaic and antiquated in their ways of operating, including incentives and even recruiting and every other facet of the business, which I could dive into another 2-hour long session about that stuff. So I'm not going to dive further into it, but that's the type of stuff that I see and I look at as I hear the same stuff you heard in the 80s and the 90s in terms of operational best practices, including rewards or incentives.
But do you find that a lot of leaders, or at least I'm not going to say a lot, it's common practice for people to kind of look for that universal silver bullet when it comes to that type of stuff, where it's like, because what I hear you saying when you talk about what you just did, which was I used a talent called listening, where I went in and I said, right, I went in and said, okay, what's the goal, right? Who's in what's involved? Let me listen to see what really motivates and inspires and connects people in this process. And then let's build something that supports and drives that, right? And I think when you're looking at ICPs, when you're looking at sales and marketing, when you're looking at what we call ideal agent personas and things like that, to me, that's the big gap in brands and people committing brand slaughter quite a bit, is they just don't listen to what we assume. We all get in ivory towers at times, and we assume we know what other people really want and what fires them up, versus asking them, right, what goes, and then building something that actually connects to that. Has that been your experience with it too?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's actually one of my biggest frustrations in a lot of the companies that I worked for. And most of them are, as I said, Fortune 100 or 500 companies and publicly traded companies, and it's quarter to quarter results. And so there's a trade-off for the short term all the time. And so for me, I say, let's do the right thing. And that means, and particularly, we're all accountable for sales and revenue. And so for me, it is listening. I'm like, we don't carry around the proverbial toolbox. We're going to go in, we're going to build a relationship with our prospective or current clients and understand what is their strategy, what are their pain points. A big one, I have the team ask, how are they measured? So when it comes time to going, hey, we might actually have a solution for you. And by the way, we're going to deliver this A, B, and C things, which is how you're compensated. Like it's an easier buy or sell but that does come down to listening and also sort of, again, going back to authenticity for me from a relationship perspective. So, I'm often asked to go in and meet C-suite of our existing clients. I'm like, but I'm going to go in there. I'm not pitching anything. I'm going to have a conversation.
Right.
And then
Learn.
we'll have subsequent conversations because I've listened to them, and we'll figure out what kind of solutions can be built.
Yeah, I found that early in the contact center business, one of the things I found most challenging was in the outsource world was what you're talking about when it came to clients. And I would look at some of the contracts and this is before we started Leading Edge, but the contracts didn't, and the drivers in the contracts didn't align with how you were outsourcing. So like one group had one set of motives and drivers that made them profitable or successful. and the other group had a different set. The client had a different set. And at times they were very like polarized at times, which sets for a highly dysfunctional relationship and a extremely difficult challenge to be successful for both people. Because it was like, when this side wins, this side loses. So you were like, I remember being on projects going like, okay, if we can manage to just be successful for the client for 6 months and then successful for us for 6 months, it's just enough to keep everybody happy on both sides of the fence. But I'm thinking, this is insanity. This is business insanity 101 versus why don't we get together and align on what makes each one of us successful? And then we can translate that down into the teams because they feel it too, which causes attrition, which causes problems with the external customers. So is that what you're saying? You've seen a lot of that too? That just that kind of.
I have for sure. And, given that we're both in the business to business space, I mean, there's great books, the Challenger Sale and the Challenger Customer. The customer one talks about the dynamics of, the B2B environment. And although it was published a number of years ago now, so I'm sure the numbers changed, but at that point they said there are 5.4 decision makers for every purchase.
Okay.
And so it's understanding who's a part of that decision cycle. And they're all driven by very different things. We know what procurement wants. And lowest dollar, but the people that own the operations and the customer are measured on something different, right? Around their retention, around the net promoter scores or satisfaction, their upsell, and generating new revenue from them. But those are like diametrically opposed generally.
Yes. Yeah, they're very opposite.
And so how do you find, how to satisfy all of those and come in and show that you're going to deliver value and something for each of those different buyer types? But again, that goes back to not walking in with a toolkit. You need to be listening to all of these different people, engaging in the relationships, ultimately so that they trust you and that you're going to deliver for them against each of those metrics that make them successful.
Yeah. Well, and I'll tie it back to authenticity. I go back to when you're authentic to who you are, you as an individual are able to communicate far more effectively. When you're able to communicate far more effectively, you can then typically help other people or other businesses who are going to into relationships together communicate more effectively, right? So it really does go back to what you said earlier, which is being authentic to who you are and having a deep understanding of who you are and being able to communicate that truly in whatever environment you're in. It becomes your most powerful foundation for success. So I know we got a few minutes left, and John, if you have any questions you can ask, go ahead. But I did want to touch on a couple of things with her around anything she want to talk about the book, and then talk a little bit about a couple of things on your keynote speaking. But did you have a question here, John?
I'd love another 10 hours with Victoria, but
I know
time. Yeah, you can just jump in.
What we should have done is had her list out all the things that she's like a variety junkie like us. Give us categories, and we just do like a series of shows. We could have done like, okay, here's a series on Unstoppable. Here's a series, whatever. But we're going to try to jam it all into an hour, and then maybe she'll be kind enough to come back on again at another time. We could talk more about some other stuff. But when you're what you wrote for that book Unstoppable, can you? I know that's all. It's got to be cool. I've never published anything, so I think I want first and foremost, congratulations on doing that, because I think that's just a neat accomplishment for someone to do. But can you share a little bit about, I think the chapter you wrote is called The Courage to Live, right? Can you share a little bit about what that is and what that's about and what the idea was behind contributing to that book?
Yeah, so I've been, a friend of mine actually had been an author for the publishers for a different book, and she got us connected. And when they came to me, first of all, and said that it was unstoppable, and I'm like, okay, this is just serendipity. And given, again, my philosophy, and it was a surprise for me. The publishers made me the opening chapter in the book to sort of set the stage, which was great. And so it was a little bit of the story that I've shared with you now, and some of the things that I've learned around being resilient. That's what's in that chapter. I have plans. I've been asked to write a full-length book at some point. There's a part of me that thinks I'm not old enough yet, or I need to do a little bit more, but so I probably will at some point. Instead, you're going to see me I do write a ton of content for Forbes and Fortune and a bunch of different places. I do enjoy it. Yeah. And so, so that was, that book. And so stay tuned. I'll let you know, and you can have me back on if I need to pitch the full-length book at some point.
Very cool. And so if people want to pick that up, they can just grab that online, Amazon or wherever.
Amazon or on my website directly. It's there as well.
Okay, perfect. And we'll have all that in the comments below. We'll get all that from you so that people want to pick that up. I'd encourage you to pick it up because it sounds like it's an amazing story. Last kind of category to chat a little bit about would be your keynote speaking, because it looks like you do a considerable amount of that when, I don't know when, but somehow between all the other stuff you're doing, maybe you figured out a way to put more time in a day than the rest of us have. But you've got, it looks like you key in on kind of 4 things, which is the unstoppable thing, accelerating your career through personal brand and strategic networking, the future of work, which is now, right? And then diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so out of those 4, is there one that that's probably you do the most with, or that you see now, like, I'm really getting a lot of people interested in this topic? And if so, what is it? And maybe share a little bit about that.
Yeah, the one I'm requested to do the most is Unstoppable, which is my story, and then talk about the career advancement and journey and the lessons I would leave with people, because it can resonate with so many different audiences. Whether as the motivational speaker at the kickoff for a sales conference, or it can be, I will tell you, March, Women's History Month, and for International Women's Day is probably one of my busiest. And so speaking to that group, to Pride Month would be another one as well. And so I'm asked to do that. Just again, it resonates with large audiences. And then the other ones, yeah, it just depends. I mean, connected to future work is a lot of what we've talked about around leadership and culture, and the way we look at skills, and diversity all ties into that. So I tend to listen to the organizers who ask me, again, who's their audience and what's the message they're trying to convey. And sometimes I mix and match from all of those to, present the right keynote for, their audience.
Gotcha. Okay. That's awesome. John, you got anything?
No, I'm still just trying to figure out how everything gets crammed into a 24-hour day. Like, it's amazing.
Yeah. It's got a lot going on.
Yeah.
I like, so one of the reasons I was really excited to have you on the show is I think when you zoom out on Victoria, she's the brand. Like, a lot of people get caught up with, I'm in corporate America, so the brand is really the brand I work for, and that is a brand, or I'm doing this over here and there's that brand. But she keys in on something. And I had another friend of mine talk to me about this a while back, and I think it's a powerful message, that when you make yourself the authentic brand that you take to whatever environment you go into, when you decide to pivot or change, you carry all that with you, right? And the way he explained to me was like, if you put all your branding into, and for me, into LEC, if LEC, it was all about leading edge connections. If at one point in time you sell LEC, you're starting from ground zero again, right? Like, you're starting all over again. But when you focus on and it's not a selfish thing, it's just a thing to make yourself bigger. And when you make yourself bigger, you make yourself more powerful. When you make yourself more power and more authentic, then you're able to accomplish more, which you obviously are doing. So I just think that's a cool part, is that you're a perfect picture of that, of saying, like, and then you get to choose, right? Like, you give yourself the ability to say, yeah, I want to be in corporate America. I also want to do this. I also want to do that. And because you're not hiding under the umbrella of someone else's brand as your identity, right? You still work for brands, but it's not your personal identity. You have the ability to exercise and the freedom to have the opportunity of choice in your life, which I think is something that's highly attractive to young and older people that are out there that may feel stuck, right? And say, like, how do I get to the point where I have this more, because that's what most of us crave, is freedom, right? We want the freedom to be able to live our lives the way that we want to. So I just think I want to tell you, I think it's phenomenal what you've been able to accomplish. It's encouraging. I'm going to make all my girls watch this episode and check it out. So if people want to get in touch with you, because we really enjoyed having you on, and like I said, I'd love to have you back on again at some point in time, especially if you write the book, because we want to hear all about that. But if people want to get in touch with you for any of this stuff, what are the best ways to reach out and connect with you?
So I do have a personal website, which is victoria-pelletier.com, where you can learn a lot about me. A lot of the content I publish is there as well. And for those who want to connect on other social platforms, you can get the links directly from there. Although, as my younger one tells me, I'm really old because I'm not yet on like Snapchat or TikTok. So you will not find me on those, but all of the other platforms, for the most part, you can link with me directly off that website.
Okay, perfect. And we will share all those also in the show's notes. And so we just want to thank you for coming on today. It's been a pleasure learning more about you and hearing about what you've done and what you are continuing to do in your life and in the world. So I just want to encourage you to keep doing that, keep being yourself. It's amazing. So we appreciate everybody watching the show. It's been amazing to have Victoria on today. So if you like the show, please leave some comments. Let us know what you think. Like, comment, share, let other people know about the show as well. We appreciate you watching this episode of Brandslaughter, and we'll see you, or Preventing Brandslaughter, and we'll see you next week.
That's all for this episode of Preventing Brandslaughter. We do wish you limitless business success as you perfect new ways of protecting your brand through stellar employee retention, killer customer experience, and unprecedented sales and marketing. Get more valuable advice on brandslaughter prevention that helps you avoid messing up your brand by listening to more exciting discussions at lec4u.com. That's LEC4YOU.com. Never miss another episode, and be sure to get your business-savvy friends to listen as well. We hope to see you on the next one. Thank you for listening.